тебя никогда не забуду. Твою улыбку, твои мечты, твои глаза. И каждый миг и вечность всю я благодарна буду за нашу встречу небесам, за нашу встречу
Now we are in Odessa, Ukraine. We had the pleasure to interview 4 experts who are some of the best and most experienced English language teachers in Ukraine. They are professors and Access Micro Scholarship Program teachers. The English Access Micro Scholarship Program is an international project created and sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, which aims to help teens from economically disadvantaged backgrounds gain opportunities in employment, education, and life in general. So these teachers have vast knowledge of both teaching English and experience with students from different ages and backgrounds. They are a good sample of teachers as they come from regions such as Luhansk, Sloviansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia.
I helped my teacher, Luis Perea, to interview teachers from all the Ukraine.
Hello, my name is Luis Perea, so I am a teacher also at Surzhyk National University of Mykolaiv. So to continue our research on the language use in Ukraine, we have gathered a very special group of teachers. They are access teachers, they are the best in Ukraine. They are very knowledgeable about teaching English, teaching access students. They have a lot of years of experience. So this is a great group of teachers that we have here, that we have the privilege of interviewing them. And I'm gonna let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Oksana and I'm from Starobilsk. It's Lugansk region, and I'm a teacher at university and also I teach access students.
Hello, my name is Marina Shevchenko. I'm from Slavyansk. I am associate professor in Donbas State Pedagogical University, and I also am an access teacher in both cities in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk in Donetsk region.
My name is Alena Tanchik, and I'm head of the Department of Foreign Language at the Donetsk State University of Management, which was displaced 4 years ago from Donetsk to Mariupol, and now we are based and we are working in Mariupol. It's in southeast of Ukraine. I'm a language teacher.
Hello, my name is Oksana Holod. I am a teacher of English. I teach at secondary school, but I also teach some access courses and some other English courses, and I'm from Zaporizhia, from the east of Ukraine.
Anybody can answer, yes. Go ahead.
Okay.
So, yes, there is a certain situation in Ukraine that we mostly, especially they say in the east of Ukraine, mostly in Zaporizhia and such cities speak Russian. I don't think it's a lack of patriotism. I think it's just like custom, because from our childhood all of us have been speaking Russian and we are just accustomed to it, and if necessary we can speak Ukrainian, and we speak Ukrainian and write Ukrainian if we deal with some legal documents, if we speak at some conferences or some events of such level, but in our everyday life maybe it's easier for us just to speak Russian.
So that's very interesting question. I have never thought about it, but I think Surzhyk is something that should exist because it identifies us as the people from Ukraine, and we use this mixture of different words and collocations and idioms which belongs to this or that region. And I can't say that people who speak Surzhyk are not literate and do not speak good Russian or Ukrainian. Sometimes it's just more interesting and it's more fun to say exact word in this language. Just people get used to it. So that's my opinion. I think it should exist, maybe not at official level, but in informal communication, it gives some fat and some spice into the language and into the conversation. So I'm not against it as a language teacher.
I can add that we have like a formal and informal conversation. Of course, we cannot use, we shouldn't use Surzhyk when we give an interview, we give rapport. But of course, Surzhyk is the element of culture, I think. Sometimes we talk about some Ukrainian writers who were judged to use Surzhyk in their works before in the past, but now they are really great examples of like Ukrainian representatives who started like a new language and gave some power to the language. Sometimes, yeah, it can be an element of culture, and if we, of course, understand the difference between slang and Surzhyk, because it can be like misunderstanding between all two terms.
I see.
I think that Surzhyk is a kind of the element of the language that comes from the background, from the family, of course. If mother and dad speaks,
This mixture
uses these words, of course a child would use it, but when he or she goes to school, a teacher should explain the difference between talk, speak, tell, and chart, and because in the Ukrainian language we have, for example, if we have the word to speak, we have a lot of Surzhyk words that can explain, like have the same meaning, but should be used in different communicative situations, formal or informal.
As a language teacher, personally, I'm not against influence of English language into Ukrainian one. I'm not against this. But recently we have a discussion with my colleagues, with prominent professors, I would say, who are pretty much against this. And they say why we should use the word collaboration, collaboratia, in Ukrainian, as we have our own words in Ukrainian language. Or nowadays it's very modern to say the words agenda, right, even in Ukrainian language. But I say, why not? If we have this European vector of development, if we want to internationalize our education, if we want to be so open and to put Ukraine into their world level, why not? Or you can use the mixture of languages. You should keep your traditions, you should keep your words, but why not to integrate some international one and especially English one into your language? Okay, why not? Especially in spoken conversation or at the round table or conferences at the international level. So it makes conversation smoother and more open. So but it's again only my personal perspective. But I'm sure colleagues will agree with me that English has a big impact and influence on both Ukrainian and Russian in our country. It's inevitable.
It would be also nice to implement some Ukrainian words into the world society, because it's the element of prestige. If we have, for example, a great invention of something created in Ukraine, so this invention can be taken like a word to any other culture or to any other language, and it could be also a motivation for different cultures and countries to bring something new to the world culture, to invent something, to study something and give specific terms to this, and maybe some other languages will take our words as borrowings. Sometimes we cannot explain in Russian or in Ukrainian the term that has taken from the English language because of the origin, because of context, and of course we have synonym level, on the synonym level they are pretty the same, these words, but still, if you know the origin, if you know the background of this word, if you are specified on this term, we really want to use it because it has its own meaning and content.
I think Ukrainian language can't be just like killed because it's the language of the country, and if the country exists, it should and it will have its own language. And in many countries there are several languages, and we can see, I think, a tendency that with every next generation they use Ukrainian more and more. So I don't think that there is some threat for Ukrainian language, and we as like previous generation maybe use more Russian, but it depends on our next generations, and I think Ukrainian language will exist in any case.
Of course it will. Unless the country is there, the language will be, I'm sure, pretty sure.
We know that there are a lot of countries in the world that have bilinguistic
3-4
tendency,
languages,
like in Canada and Spain and France and everywhere. So I just want to add that the language we speak, or two languages we can speak, shouldn't be the instruments for political misunderstanding or judgment. Sometimes I don't want our politician to
speculate
to use,
on that, right?
It is bad because you know that Ukraine is a very big country, and of course we have a lot of neighbors around us, and we hope that we will survive territorially and culturally, and of course language is something that everyone touches every day. But of course, the Ukrainian language should, as for me, be official language for official documents and formal communication, because it still has the right to exist, and it has its own origin, and those pupils, I mean those children who were born in Ukraine and now they are taught in the Ukrainian language, they wouldn't face this problem in 5 or in 2 years, because they are citizens of new Ukraine, and it's not a problem for this. So let the old generation speak what they want, but I think that new one will choose their own way to promote their own language and tradition and culture.
Yes, for me, I also agree with my colleagues. Ukrainian language is our official language, is our mother tongue, but it doesn't matter that we can speak other languages as any country in the world. Some countries have several official languages, yes, and people feel freely to use even English, French, or other. I can say from my point of view, and in my region nowadays it is popular among teenagers especially to use only Ukrainian. Some of my students, they use only Ukrainian in their everyday life, except access classes of course. And people used to use Russian in everyday life, but now they prefer use Ukrainian. I don't know why. It's once again, in our region it's okay to use Russian and Ukrainian, so it's not a problem, and it doesn't depend on any political issues or something else. I think it's because the borders. So in our part of Ukraine, this part of Ukraine, people use Ukrainian and Russian. Yeah. In the other part, they can use other languages, something like Polish, yes, and Ukrainian. So it's okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I would say so many people, so many minds, and in my region I'm from Donetsk, and of course people had different opinions and various minds, and of course people who, because of different reasons and circumstances, had to stay in Donetsk region. They are more pro-Russian, and they, of course, they promote Russian language more. Those who left the territory, again, different opinions and different customs they have, but the majority, again, as a modern wave, with the modern tendencies nowadays, they try to promote Ukrainian language, promote Ukrainian culture more. Maybe before the conflict, we didn't feel it so drastically, we didn't think about that so deeply, but now this patriotism, we try to promote it, and yeah, I think people have these tendencies and are inclined to speak more Ukrainian one, and I think it's good. And I even, as I have already mentioned, I don't mind when they speak Ukrainian with English intervention. Why not? Okay, so if we have this European and Western direction. Okay.
I want to add that I am from Slavyansk, it's also a small town in the east of Ukraine where most of the population speak Russian language. And before the conflict of 2014, no one made us speak Ukrainian. Yes, of course, the Ukrainian language was official language and is official language. This is the language of court system, education, all the curriculums and the law or any procedure in their system of local educational authorities or authorities working in English or in Ukrainian, but still only after the conflict, like when it started, I saw many TV shows when reporters told that we were not allowed to speak Russian, but I don't think that it's true. We spoke and can speak Russian with our families, with our family members, and but of course, it's better not to sometimes to touch this topic because it's a little bit burning still, especially for those who are over 45 or 55. But everyone who now study at school, at universities, they understand the importance of knowing their own language, and we have a lot of great works in Ukrainian literature that cannot be read in Russian because it is completely the other meaning of this work. So that's why it's another way, because like Oksana told, young people, so teenagers like to use Ukrainian language. It's also like a good habit, even if they speak Russian in their families. And they also create their own Ukrainian words. It's also a process because of some new tendencies of fashion, and they try to give an implementation to the Ukrainian language. So.
I see.
And the situation very known nowadays with tests on Ukrainian language, yes, you know? Yeah, about this test. So I'm not completely agree with this test. I think that the same like with English. If you want to participate in some programs, yes, exchange programs or else, you can pass this test. But if you native Ukrainian, yeah, so why you should pass this test? I don't understand actually. I was born in Ukraine. My mother is Ukrainian. My father is Ukrainian. So it means that. I know Ukrainian, yes, I can speak Ukrainian, but this piece of paper doesn't matter. If we talk about Ukrainian and Russian,
Yes.
I think that Ukrainian is like official language, and we can use only Ukrainian in our official documents. Yeah. So if we talk about Russian, we can just speak Russian. Yes. So not write documents or something like that.
Okay.
So not so much interchange between these languages.
No, I would say it all depends. It all depends on the part of Ukraine where you are, your background, your society level, level of your education, and many factors. Like for us, for educators, for me, it's not a problem. I can almost easily switch between the languages, but I'm into education and I use both languages, Ukrainian and Russian, every day on a regular basis. But for some people, it can be a big, worry and trouble for them, so they are not ready to switch to both Russian or Ukrainian. Okay, it all depends on the region and on your background and family background, and a lot of different factors. So that's why we really need to carefully study who is able, who is not. So I think for young generation it's getting easier and easier with the time, and for educators, but for, again, speaking about people of third age, generation and so on, so for them it can be a concern because they're a bit fixed in their ways and they get used to using this or that language. So and of course political situation and your political beliefs.
You may use Russian in your everyday life, but when it comes to some official documents, you cannot switch.
You
to
want
Russian.
it or not, but if you're in Ukrainian,
it doesn't matter. You easily switch to Russian Ukrainian or not. You know Ukrainian or not, but you must do it. So applications and so on.
There is also a tendency to respect the language other person speaks. I mean, if I speak Russian in the west of Ukraine, I may face I can meet a person like reaction that it could be not so pleasant for them to listen to the Russian language, but still when I change it into Ukrainian, I see this smile, and I have like a portion of respect because I really, even if I speak with an accent, even if I speak with mistakes, I mean like not literated Ukrainian language, but still it's a kind of respect. And also, there are a lot of non-governmental organizations here who came to help us from Europe, from the United States of America, and all these guys are mostly speak Russian language. It's also have a kind of respect to them because they study the language that is maybe not related to Ukraine, but still everyone understands Russian language in Ukraine. And we should have this respect that other people, other nationalities can say even a couple of words in the Ukrainian language, even if they have more words in the Russian. So I think that the tendency of respect is coming, and we cannot judge a person when he or she speaks the other language. We should motivate, like being a teacher, I really like to motivate them to learn more languages, as we know, like the old saying says, the more languages you know, the more times you are a human, or something like that, I don't know. Yeah. English.
When I start some lessons, I always tell my students that I will speak 3 languages. I will speak English, I will speak Russian, and I will speak Ukrainian. As Ukrainian is the official language, we are accustomed to just like explain grammar or something like this in Ukrainian or translate in Ukrainian. That's why I just mechanically start speaking Ukrainian when I'm talking about some grammar points or things. I, of course, speak English mostly at our English lessons, but Russian is also the way to speak when we just talk about some everyday events or just some informal conversation, so it's also very often spoken in our language, in our lessons.
I have the same situation. It's like a switcher, internal switcher. So in everyday conversation, mostly I get used to speaking and using Russian language with my relatives, friends, and wherever. When I'm speaking about academia, while doing the research, writing an article or thesis, of course it's only Ukrainian, and they know how to formulate the sentence nicely and logical and beautiful in Russian language.
Some words.
Yeah, so I even know how to formulate it. So it's very natural for me to put a sentence in the Ukrainian one. But when I have to speak on the public, like I think even doing this kind of interview, for me it's even easier to speak English. I even don't know how to say it, all these words in Russian or Ukrainian. So like concerning public speaking, I would use, or lecturing, I would prefer English because at university, where I spend like most of my time during the day, I stand up and I speak English to my students, right? So like I used to have some situations where I have to stand up and say something and okay, which language to grab, which language to use. So that's internal switcher works very well. Okay. So but Ukrainian, I would associate myself still with Ukrainian, melodious. One of the most melodious, because I'm Ukrainian by origin, so still it's appealing to me.
To speak Russian to my family, but still, as for the culture, as for the literature and music, I really like Ukrainian songs and Ukrainian pop groups.
Now it is popular in Ukrainian groups among some Russian.
Interesting.
As for songs, for poems, I really like Ukrainian because they have some origin that is perfect, and it is very expressive. If we talk about diversity of words, synonyms, different kinds of devices that are used in literature, it's very great to analyze quantity of words in the English language, the Russian one, and the Ukrainian one. And I was surprised that there are more words in the English language than in the Ukrainian one, because I thought like it's like a very, very expressive and multi-words language, and But in everyday situation, I cannot even find partners for speaking real Russian language, because still it is not the Russian language, because the intonation is different, the accent is different. Of course, we use slang and we use Surzhyk in the east of Ukraine. So, actually, in my life, I met only 2 or 3 people who spoke real Russian language with accent and pronunciation and using words from the Russian. So
the situation will be the same, because once again we use Ukrainian in official way, but still we speak Russian at home with families, with friends.
So it will still survive, it will thrive.
as we are philologists, and sometimes when you ask your pupil who is 7 or 6 to write down the translation from English word, and this pupil wants to write in Russian but using Ukrainian letters. We have like optional course of German language and Russian language.
Okay.
So of course some choose like Russian, and it is very bad that the tendency to speak Ukrainian is great, and they like it, and it should be, but still being researchers, being philologists, we should also teach those kids the Russian language, because they write with plenty of mistakes in Russian language, and it is bad when they speak Russian but they can't write it. They read it, but when we just see the message to mom of the teenagers aged 15, you understand that it's better to know grammar rules, and still for those pupils who speak Russian in their families, it would be correct to give them opportunity to study grammar and but write in correct way.
There were situations not with 7, 8 phones when they're 15. What about 7 years old? They just speak Russian, for example, in my region every day, but they even can't read books in Russian because they don't know these letters. And yes, I saw my daughter's letters when she wrote in using Russian, but with Ukrainian letters without any right spelling. So it was terrible, and so they should be taught to do it, because they still use this language, and they still hear it, and they still need to know something, not to be so, I don't know, like uneducated to in writing, in spelling, something like this.
It's good to know them. Write with mistakes or use it with mistakes.
And speaking about the language, the existence of Russian language in the territory of our country, what I would say, it all depends on the government, how they're going to push it, what is going to be in 10 years' time, right? So some people already maybe know, but we commoners, so to say, we can only predict. Nobody could predict the conflict and the war conflict in 2014. Right, so I think it all depends. A lot depends on how government will promote and push. If there are going to be very bad restrictions, so to say, and limits on how to use Russian language, who knows? Maybe it will step by step fade away, right? And we will use it less and less. But if it is at the stage as it is now, I think it will still exist, even in 10 and 15 years' time. So. I think a lot of people would oppose and would against that. I'm sure there would be some conflicts and hardships about that, and we will see what the conflict will lead to. I will try it because I'm a language teacher. It's interesting for me to develop new skills and new abilities. So I actually don't mind, but I understand that it is really unfair to those who use Russian as their L1. So I'm convinced that it is unfair. Probably don't be so stuck into one language. Open up. Be ready to learn and to possess some other skills and knowledge. Because what language is not only words and you build the sentences. Language is culture. It's values. It's traditions. It's the point of view and the absolutely different world. If you know the language of another culture, of another nation, you would probably be on the same wavelengths and page with those people. If not, there can be English, for example, can be the common language, right, between many nations. But still, it's not that 100% understanding between you and another person. And if you want to really have nice communication, and you really want to be the world person, to change yourself, learn and study other languages. It will make your life absolutely different. You will have absolutely different emotions. knowledge, backgrounds, and your life will never be like if you know and speak only one language. So promote your language, promote your L1, promote your mother tongue, but be ready to accept other words, so to say, right? Words from other languages as well. So that would be my message. And I really regret not being able to speak 5, 6, 7 languages. It would make my life sometimes even easier when I travel and speak to other nationalities. Even with Julius, we could speak Spanish, not English.
Yes.
All right, so, and who knows, maybe our conversation would be deeper than just in English. Okay, so that's
I
my
want
message.
to leave a message like I really support our government tendency to promote the English, the Ukrainian language, Ukrainian language into the system of education and official sphere. It should be, because it's a really difficult time for us. 2 generations, those who are over 30, for example, we are on their barrier of cultures, and we really need to support our country in such a difficult time, and we should motivate everyone learn the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture and tradition, but we should also know the rights of the citizen of Ukraine, as we have freedom of speech. Of course, according to the constitution, the main law of the country, official language is Ukrainian, but still we shouldn't judge those who speak the Russian language or Hungarian or Polish. There would be a tendency to judge those who are from Uzhgorod or the territory that are close to Hungary or Poland. You know what can happen, and I just want to to have my country united. And still, I believe that the language shouldn't be used in like an instrument to persuade someone or push someone doing something. And I believe that in 10 years, our students and our pupils will have a good knowledge of the English language as well as Ukrainian language, even if they speak Russian now, because this tendency is alive, this tendency is healthy, and psychologically sometimes some people really don't want to study Ukrainian because they are pushed to this. So let this process be a little bit natural, a little bit healthy, not provoking, not so arguing, and everyone inside believes for the better future of Ukraine, and language should be a great element of our culture, and even someone doesn't want to study and learn it, but still everyone understands. So there was a crack in our minds, like, yes, this is something that belongs to our country, to our origin, to our backgrounds, and let the Ukrainian language be great and well spoken.
Okay, I would like to add that first of all, we are citizens of one world, as we discussed today. We should exist together. If you know other languages, it means that you know somehow other cultures. Yeah, so you can, of course, you broaden your mind, and probably it's a good way to make some changes and make world better place. Yeah, not to make wars or conflicts like now in Ukraine and other countries. But probably if we had a tendency to learn more languages, around the world, so we could avoid these conflicts.
I also agree with these opinions, and I think that Ukrainian is, of course, our main language, and we should respect it and use in all these spheres, and maybe we will use it more and more with every year. But of course, studying great importance because it gives us freedom and lots of opportunities, and I think it's very important nowadays.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good luck with your research.
Good luck.
Opportunity. Thank you. Very powerful insights were discussed by these expert teachers of English, Ukrainian, and Russian. They brought the regional experiences from their students and their own knowledge in particular. So, what could we assume about the linguistic situation in Ukraine? First of all, I like their perception of the linguistic variety called Surzhyk, not as a deviation of two languages, but more as an informal code, an element of Ukrainian culture, and a spice added to language. One aspect we cannot deny is its usage within many families since childhood. It caught my attention how Ukrainian teachers were open to the influence of English and perhaps other languages into their own language as means of integration to the European Union. Perhaps because English as a lingua franca brings prestige and global understanding. Another positive trend we see, as they declare, is the slow but steady spread of Ukrainian even in the conflict zones. Since the old generations still embrace Russian language, the transition will be slow and eventually perhaps Ukrainian will be fully accepted and recognized by all people in Ukraine. In terms of one of our research questions, we wanted to know if diglossia is a phenomenon happening in Ukraine. Based on this feedback, in some areas in Ukraine, the Ukrainian language is absolutely the formal language used in the government settings, professional jobs, education and documentation, while Russian is used more informally. However, it also depends on the regions in Ukraine, the situation and the specific context. So in other regions, both Russian and Ukrainian languages are used interchangeably. This in turn means also the prevalence of transglossia. A final point worth mentioning is that as Ukrainian language gets more attention, our teachers warn still about the need to teach Russian language. Despite the fact there is a new tendency to learn Ukrainian, students, when using Russian, they make mistakes and there is a need to teach them proper grammar, which in turn it is part of their linguistic right. Our teachers state that there is still hope for the Russian language used in Ukraine, since in the context of the family and friends, it is still used. All in all, its survival will depend on the government and current conflicts in Ukraine on the east and the south to either promote it, push it, limit it, or add restrictions on the use of the Russian language. On the other hand, the push of Ukrainian language could be detrimental to those who use Russian as their first language. Teachers stated that the government should not judge those who speak Hungarian, Russian, Polish, amongst other languages spoken in Ukraine. As some people are adapting to the uses of Ukrainian, some of them reject it because they believe they are being forced to it. Therefore, the learning process should be more organic. Language should not be used as a tool to manipulate people into specific agendas. After all, and based on the current situation in Ukraine, the Ukrainian language is a symbol of belonging. It is desired to have the country united. As the Access teachers have declared, Language is not only learning about words or grammar to be able to put together a sentence. Language is traditions, values, culture, a different world, a point of view. It brings different emotions, backgrounds, knowledge, and after learning a different language, life will not be the same. To be able to know another language means to be on the same wavelength with people of another country. It brings deeper conversations.
Оставайся собой, улыбайся рассветом и уверенным шагом вперед, навстречу весеннему ветру. Жизнь прекрасна, смотри, сколько лучиков светлых вокруг, океаны любви и улыбка, что дарит друг. Пусть солнце лучистое в душе твоей разольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи и дыши и люби, и каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. И каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. Даже если вдруг гром град по сердцу обильно, есть на свете родимый дом, где поймут, а ведь любят так сильно. Рядом пусть будет та, для которой ты смысл и счастье. Нежным взглядом она защитит от беды ненастья. Пусть солнце лучистое в душе твоей разольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи и дыши и люби, и каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. И каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. Пусть солнце лучистое в душе твоей разольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи и дыши и люби, и каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. И каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом